What's up, everybody? For the FTWitachi here, you know what it is. Thank you very much for tuning in and waiting for this final guide for Warlocks to get released. This is going to be covering legendary items in World of Warcraft Shadowlands for Warlocks in Destruction, Demonology, and Affliction. I've released guides specifically for Demonology. I've released guides specifically for Destruction, as well as Affliction. I've also gone into deep details on Covenants, Soulbinds, Conduits, and now we're going to be getting into Legendaries. So the reason why I've decided to keep the Soulbinds, Covenants, Conduits, and Legendaries in just one video pertaining to all three specs is because that was just probably the easiest way to go ahead and do that. And then when it came to Demonology, Affliction, and Destruction, the specs themselves are so diverse and there's so much to it. If I were to do an actual full-on video, it would be very, very long, and I did not want to be posting a 2-hour video to covering everything for those videos. So, in Shadowlands, legendary items are being reimagined. Instead of working to acquire a legendary gear piece, you will work to acquire material that will allow you to craft and add a legendary power to an existing gear piece. Every class has 4 general legendary powers and 4 spec-specific legendary powers. Many of these legendary powers are inspired by past set bonuses, artifact powers, and Legion legendary effects for your class. So, you're going to be having 4 general legendary powers for your class, and 4 spec-specific legendary powers equaling to 12 spec legendary powers, and 4 from your class, making that 16. Plus, there are a couple of others, so stay tuned for those ones as well. We will be covering every single legendary power at the beginning of this video, and then we will be making into Destruction, Demonology, and Affliction the best legendaries for each spec, so stay tuned for that. As stated earlier in the introduction, every class has 4 general legendary powers, and 4 for each spec. All classes also have access to 8 general legendary powers, which we're going to be getting into now, starting off with Echo of Eonar. Your spells and abilities have a low chance to summon a spiritual familiar to your side, increasing your damage by 10%, healing by 10%, or damage reduction by 10% for 10 seconds, based on your roll. This effect is duplicated on up to 3 allies at 50% effectiveness, preferring allies with the same roll. That's going to be slot of waist, wrist, and finger. Next up, we've got Judgment of the Arbiter. Dealing damage has a high chance to release a blast of spiritual energy for 0 shadow damage. If another ally who bears the judgment of the Arbiter is within 5 to 20 yards of you, the blast will also arc to them, dealing 0 shadow damage to enemies in the arc. The reason why I'm saying 0 is because this legendary power changes based on the item level of the legendary power. So go ahead and check it out once you get to wanting to craft this one. Slots of wrist, hands, and finger. Maw Rattle. Killing an enemy has a high chance to summon an explosive Maw Rat at the corpse's location. After 6 seconds, the Maw Rat will explode, dealing 300 nature damage to all nearby enemies, poisoning them and decreasing their damage done by 5% for 10 seconds. Slot of legs, feet, and hands. Next up, we've got Norgannon's Sagacity. Casting a spell grants Sagacity, stacking up to 10 times. When you move, you are able to cast while moving for 0.5 seconds for each cast of stack of Sagacity. Slots of legs, feet, and back. Cephus' Proclamation. Reduce the effectiveness of crowd-controlling effects by 10%, successfully applying a loss of control effect to an enemy, interrupting an enemy, or dispelling any target will increase your secondary stats by 0 for 15 seconds. This effect cannot occur more than once every 30 seconds. Your secondary stats do get upgraded depending on Cephus' Proclamation's item level, so that's why I'm sticking with 0 for right now. This is going to be the slot of neck, shoulder, and chest. Sable Phantasma Lure. Increase Phantasma earned by 25%. Looting Phantasma from enemies has a high chance to summon a Phantasma demon, which will begin running in a random direction. Killing it increases Phantasma earned for the entire party by an additional 10% for 1 minute. Third Eye of the Jailer. Killing an enemy grants you the Third Eye, increasing your primary stat by 1% for 10 seconds, stacking up to 7, and increasing the duration by 1 second for each additional stack. The duration of the Third Eye is increased by 50% while in the maw, with a slot of head, shoulders, and waist. Last but not least, the 8th and final general legendary power, Vitality Sacrifice. Taking significant damage from a player or elite enemy increases your damage and healing by 3% of the damage taken, up to a maximum of 9% for 20 seconds. This effect can only occur every 30 seconds, with a slot of helm, shoulders, and chest. Now let's get into the 4 general Warlock legendary powers that all Warlock specs have access to, starting off with Claw of Endereth. Drain life now channels 100% faster and restores health 100% faster. Slot of Waste and Feet. Pillars of the Dark Portal. Demonic Gateway is now an instant cast, and your fierce use of the gateway does not trigger its cooldown. In addition, Nether Energy lashes enemies you pass through, knocking them away. This is going to be the slot of Neck and Chest. Next up, Relic of Demonic Synergy. Demonology. Damage done by you or your primary demon has a chance to grant the other one 15% increased damage for 15 seconds. And then when it comes to Affliction and Destruction, damage done by you or your primary demon has a chance to grant the other one 10% increased damage for 15 seconds. Slot of Helm and Shoulders. And next, we got Wilfred's Sigil of Superior Summoning. For Affliction, every soul shard you spend reduces the cooldown of Summon Dark Glare by 2 seconds. For Demonology, every soul shard you spend reduces the cooldown of Summon Demonic Tyrant by 0.6 seconds. And then the summon for Destruction is every soul shard you spend reduces the cooldown of Summon Infernal by 1.5 seconds with a slot of Wrist and Finger. Next up, Affliction Warlock Legendary Powers. This again is specific for only Affliction Warlocks. Malefic Wrath. Malefic Rapture increases the damage of your Drained Soul and Shadow Bolt by 25% for 8 seconds, stacking up to 3 times. Slot of Shoulder and Hands. Perpetual Agony of Azukir. Agony has a 20% increased chance to generate a soul shard. Slot of Chest and Finger. Sacrilash's Dark Strike. Corruption damage is increased by 15%, and any target affected by your corruption also has their movement speed slowed by 50%. Slot of Legs and Feet. And Wrath of Consumption. Targets that die with your agony or corruption applied to them grant you Wrath of Consumption, increasing all periodic damage dealt by 5% for 20 seconds, stacking up to 5 times. Slot of Feet and Back. Next up, Demonology specific Warlock legendary powers, starting off with Bale Spider's Burning Core. Shadow Bolt increases the damage of your Demon Bolt by 8%, stacking up to 4 times and lasts for 15 seconds. Slot of Wrists and Hands. Grim Inquisitor's Dread Calling. Each soul shard spent on Hand of Gul'dan increases the damage of your next Call Dreadstalkers by 3%. Slot of Neck and Wrist. Forces of the Horned Nightmare. Hand of Gul'dan has a 15% chance to cast a second time on your target for free. Slot of Shoulders and Finger. And Implosive Potential. Implosion grants 1% haste for 8 seconds for each imp exploded. When this damages at least 3 targets instead, gain 5% haste per imp. Slot of Helm and Waist. And last but not least, Destruction-specific Warlock legendary powers. Cinders of Azukir. Conflagrate has 1 additional charge and has its recharge time reduced by 3 seconds with a slot of Legs and Back. Embers of the Diabolic Raiment. Incinerate now generates 100% additional soul shard fragments. Slot of Chest and Back. Madness of Azukir. Chaos Bolt increases the damage of Chaos Bolt by 25%. Reduces the cast time of Chaos Bolt by 20% for 3 seconds. Slot of Legs and Feet. And last but not least, the Shawl of Rimija. We get the enemies marked by your Havoc. Take 25% increased damage from your single target spells. Slot of Waist and Legs. Alright, first off we're going to start off with the general legendary powers in Shadowlands. All classes have access to these 8 general legendary powers, and I'm going to tell you this right now, none of them are really useful in any situation whatsoever when it comes to a Warlock. They're all flavored legendary powers. They're not going to really increase your damage too much compared to the actual legendary powers that you can already craft in your spec and class specific legendary powers, but we're going to go over these really quickly anyways. Starting off with the Echo of Eonar. Echo of Eonar is a random damage buff that also buffs several players for a portion of your buff. And again, the RPPM numbers aren't really there to make this viable, comparing it to the actual class and spec specific legendary powers, so the damage increase isn't really going to be nice. This does come from the Wild Hunt, if you're wondering, so it's going to be a Wild Hunt specific legendary power. Next up, you got Judgment of the Arbiter. This is a Ascended specific legendary power, and a random damage proc that can arc more based off of how many players in the group are wearing it. The damage values aren't really worth using in any scenario, and it's kind of a legendary power that most classes aren't even going to use, so you're not really going to be able to get the high expectations and high buffs and high damage from this as you should. And again, it's just not really that high anyways. Cephus' Proclamation. This is a legendary power which you purchase for honor from the honor vendor in Ouroboros. It gives the player a buff when they perform any sort of crowd control on a target. Generally does not work on bosses in PvE scenarios such as raiding and dungeons, and unfortunately not really as good as Legion's Cephus. Way worse than any of the options listed above for any Warlock spec. And of course, it's just technically a PvP legendary, and it's just really not that good. So I don't really suggest this one either. And then of course you got Vitality Sacrifice. This is purchased from the anima from the Renown Quartermaster, and you must be Renown 14 with your Covenant to be able to purchase this one. It increases the damage based off of your damage taken. This legendary has no place in the game in its current iteration, let alone for a DPS player whose job is usually to not take damage. It doesn't really give you a great damage increase either, so it's just technically dead all around. Next up, we're going to go ahead and get into Maul Rattle. This is killing any enemy has a high chance to summon an explosive Maul Rat, again at the corpse's location, and after 6 seconds that Maul Rat will explode, dealing 300 nature damage, and decreasing the damage done for them by 5%. It's just very niche. It's not really a great legendary power overall, and it's not really going to help you in many situations, is it? Next up, you got Norgannon Sagacity. Casting a spell grants Sagacity, stacking up to 10 times, and when you move, you're able to cast while moving for 0.5 seconds for each stack of Sagacity, which is nice. It's nice to be able to cast and move, especially as a freaking Demonology Warlock or a Destruction Warlock, where our cast times are like God knows when. It takes a week to get a Chaos Bolt off, and it takes months to get a Demons out as a Demonology Warlock, but hey, comparing it to the other legendary powers, it's absolutely useless. And then we got Stable Fantasma Lure. Increases Phantasma earned. This is technically just a nice legendary to have when you're doing Torghast runs. But other than that, again, if you don't really need that much Phantasma. If you need Phantasma when you're doing your Torghast runs, you're doing Torghast wrong. Let's put it that way. So just take a legendary that's going to increase your freaking damage, which this isn't really going to do too much of, and go ahead and get through that Torghast run ASAP Rocky. So I don't suggest that one either. And last but not least, Third Eye of the Jailer. Killing an enemy grants you Third Eye, increasing your primary stat by 1% for 10 seconds. This is also increased, I believe, while you're in the Maw. So this is technically a Maw only legendary. And even then, I guess maybe next patch, 9.1, because we're going to the Maw a lot more, this could be a very flavorful legendary to have. But overall, it's kind of dead. So I don't suggest this one either. All 8 of these general legendary powers in Shadowlands are dead. Let's get into what we're here for. Destruction, Demonology, and Affliction legendary powers. Alrighty, so we're going to be starting off with the best Demonology Warlock legendaries, and then we'll get into Destruction and Affliction. So when it comes to legendary items in Shadowlands, there's not what is the best legendary to craft, it's basically whether or not it's worth it to craft. Because some of these legendaries depend on the spec and the talent choices that you have equipped on your character at this moment in time. Depends on conduits, depends on soulbinds. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is give you guys a little bit of a rundown on what makes these legendaries good enough to craft. And then also, of course, tell you guys which legendaries not even to focus on at all. So starting off with Grim Inquisitor's Dread Calling. Basically, the 1% buff of this legendary at 9.0.5 was enough to make it one of the strongest legendaries in both single target and AoE when talented with the Dreadstalkers build. And if you don't know what the Dreadstalkers build is, It's basically Dreadlash, Call Dreadstalkers, pretty much those type of talents. And if you are interested in the Dreadstalkers build, I strongly suggest checking out our Demonology Warlock guide. It's another set and forget legendary for most part, and provides an ample buff to your Call Dreadstalkers. Verdict, this legendary was bought up from basically obscurity with quite a small buff, as you often get 20 plus stacks of the buff and unleash in either single target or AoE. So as long as you're playing the Dreadstalkers build, this is going to be your go-to legendary to craft. Next up, Forces of Horned Nightmare. If you're just looking for a completely passive legendary, this is basically what you're going to want. It duplicates the Hand of Gul'dan cast, 1, 2, or 3 shards depending on which one you cast it on, and summons the same amount of imps as basically a duplicated cast. It's a simple option if you're not interested in tracking too much or anything for your legendary, and is currently a fair amount ahead of the other legendaries, as it provides a good amount of sustainable damage through Hand of Gul'dan and the extra wild imps. So it is very, very high up there when it comes to just simplified damage as a legendary power. Next up, Wilfred's Sigil of Superior Summoning. It reduces the cooldown of your summoned Demonic Tyrant. It is never a bad thing and should reduce the cooldown to nearly 60 seconds. That enables you to line up the cooldowns very effectively. This is the most well-rounded second option for all content. So if you're looking for an option for basically PvP, PvE, questing, solo content, this is pretty much your go-to, and it's also versatile with other specs, which is also nice. Reducing the cooldown of your summoned Demonic Tyrant to about 60 seconds flows nicely in almost all Mythic Plus content, and with the power of demonic consumption, having your cooldown available more often should not be discounted. Next up, you got Relic of Demonic Synergy. A simple damage bonus for both you and your Felguard is strong in relative power due to the high uptime. It is based on 3 RPPMs individually between you and your pet, and the main bonus of this legendary is the buff to your pet. Pretty much, you don't really do much damage as a Demonology Warlock anyways. It's mainly coming from your pets. So just giving you all heads up on that. Overall, it's a good, well-rounded overall option, suitable for all content with very little maintenance or anything you really need to track. So it's very, very nice legendary as well. We got some also situational legendaries, but those are the 4 main legendaries you're going to want to craft as a Demonology Warlock. Again, that's Grim Inquisitor's Dreadcalling if you're playing a Dreadstalkers build, Forces of Horned Nightmare, Wilfred's Sigil of Superior Summoning, and Relic of Demonic Synergy. If you're interested in which legendaries that I play in given situations, just go ahead and post in the comment section down below, and I can go ahead and further introduce you to these legendaries and what I do with my playstyle. Or just come check us out during a live stream and ask there. Situational legendaries that are also very nice to use. You're able to keep 100% uptime with Bale Spider's Burning Core on a constant source of amplified damage for Demon Bolt with extreme ease due to the buff lasting 15 seconds. While it is a maintenance buff, Shadow Bolt is cast often enough that you won't have to pay much attention to it. So this could become an option later on during parsing to cheese Demon Bolt damage, but currently it's outshined with the other legendaries, so it's not really that useful, but it could come handy in some meme specs, and I've tried this out before, and you can get some really, really nice Demon Bolt damage and Demon Bolt crits, but again, comparing it to the first 4 that we went over, this is not one of your go-to legendaries. And of course, Implosive Potential is primarily just an AoE legendary that offers a little back when used on single target, so this won't be a single target use legendary power at all. You are able to get massive haste bonuses, imploding huge numbers of imps after summon Demonic Tyrant, especially in AoE, but also on single target as well. But again, mostly use this legendary on multi-target situations. The verdict of this one is basically it's flexible but not ideal outside of Mythic Plus content. There will also be some use cases for this, and it does provide a healthy amount of haste for the majority of a dungeon, but it's easily outshined by the other options. But again, I did want to give you guys 2 extra legendary powers that are very situational when it comes to Warlock legendaries for Demonology. However, when it comes to do not craft legendaries for Demonology Warlocks, that's leading us to the last 2, that being Claw of Endereth and Pillars of the Dark Portal. Now, yes, I'm eventually going to craft them for collection purposes, But to give you a heads up, these two are the most useless legendary powers in all walks of freaking content. So just giving you a heads up on that. Next up, Destruction Warlocks. Probably the easiest spec in my opinion when it comes to Warlocks. Again, we're going to be going over the 4 class specific and of course the destruction specific legendary powers for a Destruction Warlock. Starting off with Cinders of Azukir. It's basically the strongest option for destruction. This is due to the increased amount of conflagrate casts. If combined with Roaring Blaze, this can be a strong both on single target and 2 targets. Raids usually consist both of single target and cleave, so this is perfect for this bonus. As well, when it comes to Mythic Plus content, it's also nice, but it isn't as good as Wilfred's and Relic, which we will be getting into in just a second. However, for your ideal crafting order, Cinders of the Azukir is probably your go-to because it is very strong legendary for raiding, decent for Mythic Plus content, and it's also very, very nice for PvP as well. However, let's get into Relic of Demonic Synergy, which is going to be the next legendary that you would like to craft. The increased percent damage proc it grants you is very strong, and in every single scenario. A small bonus is this legendary can also be used in the other 2 Warlock specs, which is very, very nice, which is definitely one of the legendaries that I currently have. So I strongly suggest Relic of the Demonic Synergy as one of your main core legendaries for Destruction Warlock to go ahead and craft. And last but not least, Wilfred's Sigil of Superior Summoning. This effect can actually also be very strong on fights where you're able to get more Summon Infernal due to the high amount of soul shards spent. This can be ideal for a fight such as the Stone Legion Generals in Castle Nathria, where you're constantly having more ad spawn, allowing you to generate and spend more Sarge. And also, again, this is also very useful for when it comes to being able to use this as an Affliction and Demonology Warlock. When it comes to basically Mythic Plus content as well, with the changes made to Destruction Warlock's talent tree in Shadowlands, we now have multiple strong talents we can combine to make a very powerful setup for Mythic Plus content. This is furthermore empowered by the Wilfred's Sigil of Superior Summoning, which is currently what we're going over. A lot of the power of destruction lies in our Summon Infernal cooldown, so the combination of these new talents allowing you to generate and spend even more shards than before, combined with the reduced cooldown of the Infernal, this makes it very extremely strong for as a burst spec. So when it comes to Mythic Plus content, I strongly suggest the Wilfred Sigil of Superior Summoning as a go-to. Relic of Demonic Synergy is a very, very nice balanced legendary for all walks of life and content for Destruction Warlock, PvP, PvE, raiding, Mythic Plus, all that type of stuff. So Relic of Demonic Synergy is great for pretty much everything. Same thing with Wilfred's as well, but if you're looking for that strong DPS, strong damage, Cinders of the Azukir is basically your go-to as well for PvP and PvE content. Those are your 3 core legendaries that you're going to want to go ahead and craft. And when it comes to the rest of them, don't really suggest crafting them because Embers of the Diabolic Raiment, it's decent increase to soul share generation, but not enough for it to be a viable option. Madness of the Azukir is also a decent bonus, but not competitive enough compared to the other ones that we've already gone over. And Shawl of Remirjar is only good for scenarios where you're able to use Havoc off cooldown, making this relatively a weak option. And then of course, Pillars of the Dark Portal and Claw of Enderath. I've already kind of gone over this in the Demonology portion. Pillars of the Dark Portal is strictly utility and doubt this will ever see any play in any form. And in Claw of Enderath, it's not realistic. This effect will see a lot of play. Situationally, the healing gain from this can be strong, but in return you won't be able to deal a lot of damage you spent in your time casting that Drain Life, and then comparing it again to the main 3 legendaries that you want to craft as a Destruction Warlock, that being Wilfred's Sigil of Superior Summoning, Relic of Demonic Synergy, and Cinders of Azukir. None of those 5 legendaries compare to. Alright, next up we're going to be getting into the best Affliction Warlock legendaries, and I said Destruction was easy. Holy, when it comes to Affliction, there's pretty much just one go-to legendary, but there's a couple of others that are also very niche and decently good as well. Starting off with Relic of Demonic Synergy. This is pretty much your go-to in any scenario, PvP, PvE, rating, Mythic Plus, leveling up, Torghast, Relic of Demonic Synergy is an overall great legendary power for Affliction Warlocks. This is a good general overall damage legendary. Every time you or your pet deals damage, you have a chance to increase the other's damage by 10%. The uptime on both the player and the pet averages out to around 50% of the time, making this a great all-around use legendary for Affliction Warlocks. After the 9.0.5 buffs, Wrath of Consumption legendary basically has shot up in power in multi-target scenarios where you have enough adds spawning and dying to keep the buff rolling. So even though Malefic Rapture doesn't qualify as a damage over time effect in benefit from this damage buff, dots are still significant enough portions of your damage to where the legendary is worth running in this exact scenario. So if there's multi-target fights or multi-target anything, or you just really want to beef up your freaking damage in like an Ultrak Valley in PvP or something like that, Wrath of Consumption is a go-to legendary power. But there's also another legendary power that is like rarely used in Affliction Warlocks, mainly just in PvP scenarios, and this used to be OP in PvP, but it got nerfed, but it's still very, very good. Is Sacrilash's Dark Strike. It's technically your go-to still. This might have some prevalence in later parts of the expansion, but 100% uptime on a slow is stupidly strong for kiting out polls and, again, especially PvP content. So again, Relic of Demonic Synergy is basically going to be your go-to legendary power when it comes to being an Affliction Warlock, but Wrath of Consumption is also nice for multi-target, and in Sacrilash, of course, mainly PvP combat, but it could have its usage in PvE content, especially when it raids and you have ads and all that type of stuff, but not too much, especially not Mythic Plus content. So again, your best Affliction Warlock legendary for PvE is going to be your Relic of Demonic Synergy as well as PvP, if you're just looking for straight up damage. And then your best Affliction Warlock legendaries for Mythic Plus is going to be that same Relic of Demonic Synergy, as well as the Wrath of Consumption, again, if you're on multi-target fights in Mythic Plus content, which you usually are. And of course, in raiding, you can also use Wrath of Consumption on multi-target fights, but there's not that much in this first tier. And then last but not least, your Sacrilash's Dark Strike, again, mainly for PvP usage. Your do not craft legendaries for Affliction Warlocks are Malefic Wrath. Your drained soul damage increase every time you cast Malefic Rapture, stacks to 3, only really good on single target, and still sims worse than Demonic Synergy, so it's not really a go-to at all. Claw of Endureth and Pillars of the Dark Portal. I've already gone over this before in the other two specs. The Drain Life now channels 100% faster and restores health 100% faster. Unfortunately, if you try using this as a filler spell, you just go so it's not really viable. And then Pillars of the Dark Portal, Demonic Gateway is now instant cast, and your first use of the gateway does not trigger its cooldown. In addition, another energy lashes enemies you pass through, knocking them away. This is just pure flavor. It's a nice power, but I just wish they just made it like standard, set in stone in Demonic Gateway. Wilfred, Sigil of Superior Summoning. Your Summon Dark Lair is no longer a strong cooldown as Affliction Warlocks. It's kind of like dead, and getting more casts over the course of a fight is significantly less powerful than the good legendaries, so I don't strongly suggest that one either. And then last but not least, you have Perpetual Agony of Azukir. Agony has a 20% chance, increased chance to generate a soul shard. It's just not worth it at all compared it to the other ones, so I strongly don't suggest that one either. And now that we've covered all of these specs, that being Demonology, Destruction, and Affliction, and we also went over the 8 basically class-based legendaries that aren't really too specific into each of the specs, meaning the class has access to all 8 of them. And again, I've already stated to not really focus too much on crafting those 8 specific legendaries because they're not really too beneficial for us, and they're very, very niche in the content that they are based around. But we did go over Demonology, Destruction, and Affliction based legendaries, and I gave you guys a little bit of an idea on which ones to craft first. In patch 9.1, now that we're towards the end of the video, we did get released 4 brand new legendaries, and these 4 legendaries are Covenant based legendaries. So starting off with the Kyrian, we've got Languishing Soul Detritus. When Scurrying Tith generates soul shards, gain 100% increased movement speed and 40% increased critical strike for 8 seconds, with this being chest, wrist, and back. This is the source of granted at renown level 48 with your Covenant. Same thing goes with the rest of these. As for the Necrolords, you got Shard of Annihilation. Decimating Bolt also increases the critical strike chance by 100% and critical strike damage by 50% for Destruction's Incinerate, Demonology's Demon Bolt, and Affliction's Shadow Bolt, as well as Drained Soul. And next up, we have for the Night Fae Decaying Soul Satchel. This one is each target affected by your Soul Rot increases your haste and critical strike chance by 5% for 8 seconds. And last but not least, Contained Perpetual Explosion from the Venthyr. Impending Catastrophe's damage over time is increased by 125% plus 15% for each enemy target hit on the way to its final target. Now, quickly going over, none of these are really going to make or break wanting to craft legendaries, meaning they're not really going to change the order of the Demonology, Destruction, or Affliction craft ordered legendaries to craft. And the reason being is these aren't really great legendaries to go ahead and utilize for any aspect of the game, especially as a Warlock, our damage. Languishing Soul Detritus from the Kyrian. It's not too much of an upgrade. When Scurrying Tith generates Soul Shards, which should be most of the time, you gain 100% increased movement speed and 40% increased crit, which is great, but it's not as good as some of the other options that we have. Next up, Shard of Annihilation. This is kind of an addition buff to Decimating Bolt, meaning critical strike chances increased by 100% and critical strike damage by 50%, and it's not really that much of a benefit to us, as Decimating Bolt shouldn't be a damaged amplifying spell for us, and it's not really that great of a legendary power. Decaying Soul Satchel from the Night Fae. Each target affected by Soul Rot increases your haste and crit chance by 5% for 8 seconds. Now, this is actually the best legendary of the 4 by far, and Night Fae is one of the best covenants for Warlocks as well. This one can be played out there. Ignore the fact that it says requires Rogue. That's just not it. But it is very, very high up there, so I do strongly suggest looking into this, but it isn't better than the ones that I have already showed you guys for each and every single spec. And last but not least, Contained Perpetual Explosion. This one just makes Impending Catastrophe not as useless, pretty much. Damage over time, the buff for the increase into damage was needed. And other than that, it's just not really that useful anyways. Venthyr is still not really a covenant for us. One little legendary isn't going to change it that much, so I don't strongly suggest taking this legendary over any of the other ones that we've gone over as well. However, it is a much needed buff, and this should just be baseline. It shouldn't require a legendary power for this to happen. But anyways, let's go ahead and get into that outro. Thank you all very much for tuning in, and again, thank you for those of you that are subscribed at youtube.com/FTWitachi. If you're not subscribed, hit the subscribe button down below and stay tuned for some more content. We're live streaming 7 nights a week. We're uploading 7 days a week. We're on Twitch as well. Check out all the social media links down below, and I'll catch you all next time. And again, if you have any questions, just post in the comment section. Peace out, everybody.